Welcome to the Sharkpreneuer podcast with Kevin Harrington and Seth Greene. Kevin Harrington is the inventor of the infomercial, one of the original sharks from the hit TV show Shark Tank, and has generated over $5 billion in TV and digital direct response sales. Seth Greene is the world's first trusted authority on cutting-edge direct response marketing, a best-selling author, and the only 3-time Marketer of the Year nominee. On the podcast, Kevin and Seth interview Sharkpreneurs who share straight talk on what it takes to explode your business.
Welcome to the Sharkpreneuer podcast. This is your co-host, Seth Greene. With me, as always, is the amazing inventor of the infomercial and one of the original sharks on the hit television show Shark Tank, Kevin Harrington.
What's going on, Seth? How you doing?
Awesome. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Steven Shapiro. For over 20 years, he's presented his provocative strategies on innovation to audiences in over 50 countries. During his 15-year tenure with the consulting firm Accenture, he led a 20,000-person innovation practice. He's the author of 5 books, including Best Practices Are Stupid, which was named the Best Innovation Book of 2011. He's also inducted into the National Speaker Association Hall of Fame and is on their board of directors. Steven, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Good to be with both of you.
Steven, it's a pleasure to meet you too. And coming out of big corporate Accenture, and now writing books, have you morphed now into more of an entrepreneurial experience now?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur, but the people I work with are still a lot of the big businesses. I mean, my clients are all the big names that you would know, because I find that they're the ones who still struggle to change course. I mean, they're so set in their ways. And so I work with entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs are already usually good free spirits. And what they need is a little more structure. The people I work with actually need a different type of structure to help them be successful.
Have you ever used the word intrapreneur?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, that's all. What we're trying to do is just create people who are entrepreneurs inside of an organization. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And so your 5 books, what's been your most powerful?
Well, I think my favorite one actually is more personal. It's called Goal-Free Living. It's how to live a life without goals and why goals are the thing which tend to destroy people's happiness and even success. And I talk a lot about why it is that the harder we try, sometimes the less we achieve. And so I love that book. And then Personality Poker is probably the one which is the most fun because it's actually a card deck that comes with the book itself.
Your title of your most recent book is Best Practices Are Stupid. Why are they stupid?
Best practices are stupid because if you start copying what everyone else is doing, you're playing a game of catch up. I mean, it's really that simple. But I also, this is sort of like the funny thing is I listen to a lot of people who talk about how to be successful. And one of the things which I figured out is most people who are successful don't necessarily know why they are successful. They think they do, but they don't necessarily. And so it's really a matter of trying to understand what is truly happening underneath the surface that had someone be successful rather than just looking at the surface and the practices that they perform.
Have you seen, Tim Ferriss has a new book, The Tools of Titans. He interviewed a lot of famous kind of people. And I don't know if you've seen that book, but I've, been on stage with Tim before and listened to some of his talks and podcasts, that he has, I think through the hundreds of interviews that he did there, it's interesting. You see so many different reasons why people are successful and some that are totally counter to others, right? And so, you're right. I think that it's a lot of people don't necessarily know what got them there. And I've always been a believer that, in my industry, we're in the as seen on TV industry, there's so many people that do knockoffs, right? That, best practices, right? They see something, like we came out with a nightlight in your toilet bowl, and there was 2 other guys that had the same thing within months. In fact, one of the guys ordered our product and put his name on it and then went out and showed our product actually to Walmart and Walgreens and said, we're coming out with this new product and you got to see it. And was actually ours, right? Because we had, proof that it was shipped to his office. And so, of course, we sued him, won, we got an injunction, and this would prove best practices, are stupid because, hey, look, we were the innovators. We were in the market first. We're now in Walmart, Target, all the different chains, et cetera. So I've always believed when people come to me and they say, do you need a patent? I've got this great idea, but I don't have a patent. I'm like, the reality is the patent is okay for certain kinds of things and protection. But if you're the first one out, OxyClean never had a patent, but it sold for $375 million because they had this huge brand and they were the first ones out, and it was innovative, and it was with the power of oxygen. It oxygenates the cleaning process. So, I think, I'm a big believer that innovation first to the market, and all of that kind of stuff is the key. And that's kind of been my calling. And I think that, probably, as you're saying, don't be a copycat. I think that's probably one of the takeaways from your book, I'm sure.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think that you do, I always believe that every company has to have a differentiator, something that sets them apart. And in many cases, it's not necessarily the products. I think what you have as a differentiator is your ability to scale, market it, get it out there, and build awareness. Everybody knows your products. Everybody knows what you're doing. And I think that, to me, is something which I don't care whether somebody comes out with a product that might even be better. It's going to be difficult for them to compete because you have the market, you have the reach, you have the scale, and those are just amazing differentiators that others can't replicate. And if they tried to, they would lose. So they have to find something different to beat you because they're not going to beat you at your game.
Right.
Steve, you talk about how we should hire people we don't like. That seems counterintuitive. What do you mean about that? Tell me more. Explain that one.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that the brain is typically wired for survival. And so as a result, we want to hang around with people who are very similar to us. And this is great for efficiency, but it is the thing which kills innovation. If we want to think differently, we need people who bring different aspects to the table. So when I look at big companies, for example, I always say, don't hire people who fit the mold because the company will grow mold. We need to start thinking about how do we bring people with different experiences, people with different personalities, people with different styles, and pull all that together. Because to me, if we're just with people who are the same as us, we're just going to get what we always got.
I have a great example that at one point we were shooting dozens and dozens of infomercials a year, 40, 50 a year. And we said, we need to get a really top-notch kind of lawyer that is very familiar with the truth in advertising laws, federal trade commission kind of activities. So we said, well, hey, how about finding somebody that used to work for the FTC? And so we hired this guy, this lawyer that was this just ball buster lawyer that used to sue marketers like ourselves. Okay. And it's his DNA was to come after marketers who were making money. And it's you talk about hiring someone you don't like. This guy was, anti-business, anti-advertising claims, but, now what we did is we used his advice to, hey, look, you tell us, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Well, okay, let's talk about the legal aspects of all that. So, so what we would find out is, well, he would say, don't do this, but he went a little further than the legal envelope actually even required. So we would push it back and say, okay, take us right to the edge of being able to, make some great claims, but keep us short of a claim that the FTC is going to say you went too far. So, that was a great example of hiring somebody we didn't like, but used him, for, sort of the pit bull that kept everybody in line,
Well, I think that's great. Most people wouldn't do that because everybody loves to have everything that they do validated. There's a great quote from Scott Cook at Intuit who said, for each of our failures, we had spreadsheets that looked awesome. And right. What happens is we love to feel good about what we're doing. We love to have people surround us and say we're doing great. It sucks when somebody says, we don't like that. This is why it's not going to work. And it doesn't mean, like you said, you don't necessarily accept everything they're saying because there's a lot of naysayers, but you have to at least take all this in to be able to have a complete picture of what's going on. Otherwise, you're just, riding in the dark with blinders on.
Steve, you work with so many amazing companies. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Best advice I've ever gotten. Well, one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is actually to ignore all advice. Because
including any of the three of us right now, right?
Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. It doesn't mean that it's good. So if I take advice, I'm going to take advice from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, somebody who has the experience, has the credentials. There's a lot of people out there, especially with social media these days. You could get completely lost in all of that and believe a bunch of things that are complete baloney. The other piece of advice which I once got, this is many, many years ago, and it stuck with me, is always make sure that you spell someone's name correctly or at least pronounce it correctly. I don't know, that always stuck with me because anytime I'm sending an email, I will double and triple check the spelling if it's a spelling that I'm not sure of.
Yeah.
Strange one, but.
Steven, for someone that's just, like I do a lot of startup entrepreneurs, you deal with more corporate kind of structures, but, do you have any recommendations for, someone that's in a startup mode on, because, for startup person, it's easier to kind of copy somebody and, copy your way to success. And I think that's, there are people that teach, hey, look, find out what somebody else is doing, do something similar until you can figure things out. But, so I have found in my world that, some of the more inexperienced marketers, are, kind of the knockoff guys that are coming out because, they don't care. They don't know anybody. They're not worried and they take more chances. But, do you have a recommendation for those kind of situations?
Well, I think there's two things that I see with the work that I do that's applicable to even individuals, not just companies or entrepreneurs, is make sure you're differentiating, coming back to something we talked about before. You're not going to beat the big dogs at their game. So figure out what your game is, play in the white space, whatever you want to call it, and have the whole process for being able to figure out what your differentiators. But don't copy what other people are doing because you're not going to win that game. It's a game of catch up. I always say replication is not innovation. But the other one, which is less obvious, I think, is don't worry about the answers as much as the questions. When you change the questions, when you change the way you look at the world, the solutions come to you. And so as entrepreneurs, a lot of times it's like we're always trying, I've got an idea, I could go do this. Look, you're chasing ideas. There's a billion ideas out there, but there doesn't mean that ideas are good. So step back, just pause and say, what is it we're really looking to achieve? What does the market need? Who's being served? Who's being underserved right now that nobody else is providing? And how can we sort of provide that? But it's the questions we ask that to me are much, much more important than any of our ideas that we might come up with.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that in my world, because as I speak to a lot of corporations, I talk about two ways to innovate. One is a quantity kind of an innovation. We actually, what we do is we put on, like I went to AT&T and we took 300 senior executives, broke them into 30 teams of 10, and then we took 30 pitches. And that was, in one day. And then we had 5 judges that took these pitches. Lori Lee was the head person from AT&T, myself, a couple of outside people, and actually Robert Herjavec was there. And so from Shark Tank, right? And so this was a quantity of ideas, and we were taking these innovative ideas. We came up with the runner-up, second runner-up, and the winner. And they got some prizes and awards and trophies and whatever, right? So that was one. Quantity is one way to innovate. But then the other side of innovation is finding the problems that exist already. And now let's innovate around solving those problems. So that's a problem-based innovation as opposed to the quantity theory. So, and I think, that's, how a lot of companies, should be innovating and it's how inventors invent. How do I solve a problem? And corporations should innovate based on solving their problems also.
Yeah, I think the challenge with ideas is like you look at suggestion boxes, which are basically just idea capturing mechanisms. I've worked with literally hundreds of companies over the year where they would get thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of ideas. Maybe 5 of them were good. They'd implement them. The whole system would implode from it, and they'd shut the program down. So quantity of ideas is good if you can somehow control it and manage it. But I believe you need constraints. I mean, innovation actually loves constraints, because if you just give somebody a blank sheet of paper, it's very difficult. But if you give them some kind of box, I always say, don't think outside the box, find a better box. That's really helpful. And so when we do this, we reduce the amount of wasted energy and get more focused. And what I love about what you do is I love, I mean, the TV show Pitchmen from years ago. I devoured that show because that to me was the best MBA and how to sell something. And it always started off like in black and white or something. And are you tired of blah? To me, that is a brilliant just mindset. And I think that's how most human beings buy. It's
a great story. Pitchmen was Billy Mays and Anthony Sullivan, and we shot a lot of that show right in my studio in St. Pete, Florida. And I actually I discovered Billy Mays back. God bless him, he's now since passed. But in 1986, back in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Home Show, and then Anthony Sullivan walked in our office in London back in 1994 and said, hey, I got an idea for an infomercial, and we did his first infomercial. So those two guys ended up becoming partners, but they were dynamite in creating television. In fact, I mean, the show was fabulous. Its first season did well on Discovery. And then when Billy passed, season 2 was short-lived because Sully had big shoes to fill trying to pull that off for himself. But it was a dynamite show, and it could have, to this day might still be on the air. But hey, look, just like we're seeing today, The Apprentice, when Donald Trump first launched The Apprentice, it was doing 15 million plus viewers. And even I think in its last season, kind of had a bell-shaped curve. I think it finished up at around 7 or 8 million viewers when it finished. And then now he's going to be the president of the United States. But Schwarzenegger's show is barely pulling 4 million. The Celebrity Apprentice with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's just not the same show without Donald Trump, unfortunately, because Trump was a lightning rod, right? So, talent is all the magic. And so, I appreciate the comment about it's funny, I don't hear very many people talk about the Pitchmen show actually, and how that was, famous, back in the day that you remember that. So thanks for bringing that up.
No, seriously, it was one of my favorites. I was just telling some people about it. I talk about it all the time still, because I think it is some of the best education we can have in terms of how to, position a product in the market.
Well, people will grab me on the streets and say the same thing about Shark Tank, and it's I'm excited that I had a couple years run with the show, and kids, and I actually am on a couple of boards at USF, University of South Florida, University of Tampa. When I got involved with USF, they said, "Hey, can you bring us every episode on a DVD? We want to teach it in our master's entrepreneurship program." So I remember walking in with a stack of like 100 DVDs and hey, look, let's go through all these segments. And they had a field day going through some of the shows, and Pitchmen was, had a lot of reality like Shark Tank does. So I think some of these shows have been good for entrepreneurs out there in the world.
Steve, you've written so many books. What are 3 of your favorites that you didn't write that have had the most impact on your work?
Probably one of my favorite books is Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It's just an amazing book in terms of, a Nobel Prize winning physicist and how he creatively solved problems. I mean, it's probably one of the best books on creativity, I think, out there. So highly recommend that. Always loved Man's Search for Meaning, because I think everything we do, I mean, I know we've got everybody talking about similar things, having your why and all that. But let's face it, that was, Viktor Frankl was the first one to really talk about the power of having a purpose in everything you do. And then let's see, a business book. It's funny. Most of the books that I read tend not to be I mean, I read business books, but where I get my best insights are in other places. So Seth, you know that I love magic. So I read a lot of books on magic, and those have helped me a lot because it's really a great process in problem solving. If you can understand how to create an illusion, create a magic trick, well, you're an amazing problem solver because you're making the impossible possible. So I've read so many books on that, from Jeff McBride's books to other people's books. I love them all. So I devour books on other topics, though, more than I do books on innovation these days.
Hey, Steven, can you give us an example of one of the best, like I'll call it a magical transformation, one of your companies or clients has had over the last couple of years, or, in your business experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's some things it's hard to talk about because some things are actually going through trademark filings and other types of things. But I'll say I'll talk about the transformation in terms of the result, not so much or more about the process than it is the specific products they release. So a number of the companies that I work, my biggest thing is all about moving companies to a mindset of asking better questions. So I call it challenge-centered innovation. So instead of being idea-driven, let's get people to solve the most important problems. And if we identify the most important problems, or at least identify the most important problems, we're much further ahead. And so all the companies I've worked with, we go through this process. And what's fascinating is when we look at the return that they got in their innovation, we've increased their innovation ROI between 10 and 50-fold in most cases by moving towards this asking better question mindset. And some of these things have led to new patents that are in the process right now, trademarks that, as we talked about before, sometimes all you need is a good brand, and they're rolling those out. But it's really that mindset that I'm finding is helping companies the most, more than the specific. So I teach them to fish rather than actually how to, catch, actually, instead of giving them, here's a product, it's about that process that they can do over and over and over again.
Great.
Steve, we greatly appreciate your time. Fascinating, creative interview. Kevin, pleasure to share the mic with you as always. Steve, anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up?
I think the best thing that I have to offer people when it comes to innovation is whatever your area of expertise is, spend time studying something else. So as I said, I spent a lot of time with magic and neuroscience and things of that nature. I worked for a Formula One race car team studying how they get pit crews to go faster. These are the types of things which I think help people be more innovative, is instead of studying your industry or your discipline, start connecting to things that are related to what you do.
I'll give you a great example, and I love that close, but just, I've been in this TV advertising business for 30 years, and I was studying the movie industry, right? It's totally a different business, watching, Brad Pitt and some of the George Clooney's of the world shoot movies. But, in studying that industry, I saw how do they market movies, and, they go international and they go to the Cannes Film Festival. So I started hanging out there, and I thought, well, wait a minute, can't infomercials go international? So it's like by studying another industry, I picked up other techniques of marketing and other distribution, and voila! All of a sudden, here we were distributing our infomercials alongside movies and other distribution outlets. So I think it's a great way to close our podcast today, guys. And Steven, look forward to meeting you soon. And with us being as close as we are, Orlando to Tampa, St. Pete, let's grab a coffee sometime soon, and look forward to hanging out with you a little bit.
Excellent. I look forward to it also.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to this special productivity series of the Direct Response Marketing Podcast. I've interviewed hundreds of the most successful entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and CEOs all over the world, and I want to share with you one of the biggest ways I've discovered to triple your productivity that I've learned from these amazing people. Even better, I'll pay you $500 to test drive it. Just go to takethe500challenge.com. That's www.takethe500challenge.com to learn more. Thanks so much for listening.